Good morning, everyone. This is Shweta from People Matters, and we are back with another exciting episode of our virtual panel discussion in partnership with At Ease on the topic Navigating the Intersectional Employee Wellness Initiatives. Before we start, I would like to share my pronouns are she, her, and hers. So, with the world of work undergoing an unprecedented yet accelerated change, people have had to face massive pressures and challenges on a lot of fronts. This comes as a result of the increased interaction between formal and personal spaces of employees, which is bound to create friction. Organizations hence can no longer do away with a one size fits all employee wellness program, as the hurdles tend to be increasingly unique. And moreover, this uniqueness stems from the particular individual circumstance that an employee comes from, which may relate to several facets of an identity ranging from religion to gender to financial. So, acknowledging and accommodating this diversity is critical to taking the employee wellness initiatives forward. Intersectionality and inclusiveness, they are interlinked as well, and the efforts made on the part of leaders need to have greater depth and understanding. A space has to be created and encouraged where employees can address their concerns or just be heard. So, with this in mind, People Matters and ATIs have come together to host a session on furthering the employee wellness agenda by creating safe spaces. We'll touch upon the value of intersectionality in the workplace and employee wellness programs, challenges in the way of ensuring well-being at the workplace, and how can leaders go about creating a safe space where employees can be they feel seen, they heard, and understood. So now I take the pleasure to invite and introduce the speakers for today. We have with us Nushin Master Nalwala, Employee Engagement, Wellness and Volunteering, Head of APAC Region for TCS. Nushin has 17 plus years in human resource management with Asia's leading IT company, and her specialities include employee engagement, employee wellness, CSR and volunteering, HR policy, process and system design, global mobility, employee communication, change management and restructuring, employee relations, talent management, and health and life insurance benefits. Welcome, Nushin.
Thank you, Shweta. Glad to be here.
Great. Next, we have with us Madhumita Venkatraman, who's founder Diversity Dialogues. She's a diversity and inclusion evangelist and a certified counselor. She's the founder of Diversity Dialogues, which is a collective which is partnered with more than 100 corporates, NGOs, and educational institutions in their diversity and inclusion journey. She's also a seasoned HR professional and a certified counselor, having worked with GE, Snapdeal, and Mercer in HR business partnering as well as consulting roles. She has led diversity and inclusion for Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages and Snapdeal, and was instrumental in initiating disability focus in GE India. Certified in gender and sexuality, sign language, and now a counselor, she is recognized by the Women Economic Forum World HRD Congress, Orinam, for her work in this space. Welcome to the session, Madhumita.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
And next we have with us Richa Vashish, Chief Mental Health Expert, Lilac Insights. Richa leads ATIS, an inclusive mental health platform with a special focus on CS women, trans women, and non binary individuals. She's been working as a mental health professional for the last 7 years, and she works at the intersections of gender and sexuality, and her worldview is queer affirmative, intersectional, and towards social justice. Her therapeutic approach is drawn from Carl Rogers with the belief that clients have the capability to be their favorite self. She uses person centered therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and trauma informed therapy. Welcome, Richa.
Thank you. Looking forward to this discussion today.
Great, same here. So, our partner for today's session is At Ease. Let me give you a brief about them. At Ease is an exclusive mental health platform that works towards creating happier and more inclusive workspaces through their services. Their wellness program offers companies the ability to improve employee well being and build policies and culture that are beneficial for both the employees and the organization. So, we have a very exciting topic to discuss today with our exciting speakers. And without any further delay, let us hear what our speakers have to share with us today. I think I'm going to start with a very broad opening question to all of you. If you can take the audience through what is meant by intersectionality, as we're going to be talking about it a lot today, and what is its value in driving employee wellness programs. Richa, would you want to begin with this?
Sure, sure. All right. So I think that's such an important question, and it's good that we address this in the beginning because it gives an idea of who kind of makes up employees who are a part of a particular workspace. So when we talk about intersectionality, what we're trying to say here is that people come from different sections of the society. So not everybody falls under the same gender, or not everybody has the same racial identity. We have people who come from who have different sexual orientation, people with disability, people with there's so many different things when we consider. And I think to give a very simple example, which I usually give in a lot of conversations and panels, is that there is a Muslim person at work, there is a Dalit person at work, there's a person who identifies as a lesbian, as a non-binary individual. Then, of course, we have women at work, we have cis men at work, we have people with disabilities, and there is so many people kind of coming together at the regular workplace you go to on a daily basis. um why did intersectionality actually come into the picture, or why are we having this conversation right now? Because we all know that, yeah, of course, there is this person who has a different race, or like, yeah, okay, why are we making such a big deal about it? That why do we really need to care about people's gender identity or their orientation? Or why do we need to care about different inequalities that are happening with cis women at workspaces? Because when we talk about intersectionality, it is about how all these different identities actually come together, and how while all these identities come together, it is about we need to be able to create safe environments, inclusive environments for all of us to be able to kind of work together. Now, what the challenge or the problem is as to why there needs to be more banter around this, is because that's not happening as of now. As workspaces, we may say that, oh, we're inclusive, or we're diverse, and we're happy to hire somebody who comes from a lower or who comes from a different class or caste. But in reality, is that really happening? Are we taking initiatives towards it? What are we doing to make it um, a safer space for somebody who comes from a different, who has a different gender identity? So all of this together, of course, in short, because I don't, I mean, I'm sure the other panelists have so much more to share, but in short, this is how I look at intersectionality and why it is important in the day and age that we are right now.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Richa. There is definitely not enough banter about it. Nusheen, what would you want to add to that?
Okay, so like Richa mentioned, intersectionality for us at the workplace is the idea that people have more than one identity. She did talk about people having an identity as being lesbian or being male or female or belonging to a particular race or a caste. But intersectionality is what? It's where two roads, multiple roads meet, right? But in the context of DNA at the workplace, it's a recognition that different social categories, race, class, gender, age, whatever, they are interconnected, and the discrimination that that person may face is often magnified as a result of that interconnection. Okay, so you do have employees with disability or employees that conform to a particular gender, but what is the but they have many other identities as well, right? They're not just one identity that the person has. And these multiple identities are what impact their experience at the workplace as well as the challenges they face. So for an example, an employee might have hearing loss, right? But he or she may also be a recent immigrant, so their challenges are magnified. Taking another example, a woman who is neurodiverse, okay, she could face challenges of being stereotyped as a woman and the expectations from a woman. These are an additional set of challenges that a man with neurodiversity would face. So it's about recognizing these multiple challenges that a person may have. Now, as health and well-being drivers for the organization, it's our job to look after the physical and mental well-being of all of our employees, right, including any employees who are, with disabilities. So we know, like, someone who is neurodiverse, right? They face a very high level of anxiety, and walking could help. So we decide to organize a walk, maybe a short hike or a simple hike, an easy walk for a group of employees, and we want these employees also to join in. Okay, but if that walk, that event that we have planned does not include any accommodations or alternatives, taking those disabilities into account, these employees with disabilities are going to feel excluded. They're going to be discouraged. They're not going to join these future events. Okay, taking another example, we do a lot of workshops in parenting. If that workshop is centered around a husband, wife, child, family structure, and you have a single mother who is also a person with disability who joins in, she's going to feel very frustrated during this workshop. Okay, so the bottom line is that when you're doing anything under, considering diversity and inclusion or any of your well-being efforts, you need to take intersectionality into account. You need to understand what the unique needs of all of your employees are. And if you're not going to do that, it's not that your efforts are going to be not successful. I mean, they won't be successful, but they could also be harmful if you've not taken intersectionality into account.
Great, thanks. Thanks for making that point that if you don't take intersectionality into view, your efforts are probably going to go waste. Madhumita, I would love to hear your views on this same. How do you think that intersectionality adds to employee wellness programs?
Sure, Shweta. So I will, take a little bit of a personal lens, and I'll do that because inclusion starts with I. You introduced me a certain way, but to add to that, I am a cisgender heterosexual woman. I'm a person with disability myself. I have a disability since birth. I am a Tamilian Brahmin, born, brought up in Delhi, Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, and now living in Bangalore. Now, these are just some identities that define me, and there are so many more that, in the interest of time, I'm not talking about today, right? Now, each of these identities have shaped me in certain spaces. For example, being a person with disability, I haven't found too many other people with disability in the corporate space. I'm perhaps the only one. As a Tamilian, I find a lot of Tamilians in the different organizations I have worked with, so I'm not the only one. And all of these have an impact on my well being.
Yeah,
Every day, when to be able to access a space, I have to ask for help. And particularly in the pandemic, it's a lot more. To get a glass, to get a milk packet for me is much harder than it is for somebody else. That also impacts my well-being. So while that nuance is what I would say needs to be understood. An employee of yours may be sitting at home today and going through domestic violence. So, if you're doing a yoga session, the yoga session will definitely help. And for that 1 hour, sure, the employee could feel better. I don't want to take away from an intervention that's commonly done. But if the employee is not able to tell you what they are going through, if they feel that even over a virtual conversation in the meetings, they are not safe, it's going to impact productivity, it's going to impact their well-being, and the yoga session may not do much, right? And therefore the interventions have to be in such a way that policy, process, system, leadership, accountability, everything comes together, and each individual with their identities, different aspects of their identities, are considered when anything is planned. And
yeah,
well-being, again, is not again, just an intervention. It's not just about doing a series of different things, but it's also about keeping that in mind on a daily basis. I mean, if you look at a lot of research now, women are going through a lot more burnout. It's
yeah,
also because there's a societal structure where they're having to manage the home a lot more, along with taking care of office and office responsibilities. So are your interventions taking care of that aspect, for example? So that's how well-being plays a role. To just be cognizant of the fact that a few interventions may not help. As a leader, as a person, you need to be aware of every identity that an individual is offering, and build a safe space so that if there's something they're not willing to share, they're able to come up, and accordingly you can think about their well-being. And it's a joint effort. The employee knows their well-being the best, so how are you making it a joint effort where they're able to tell you also? All these things need to be taken care of, and that is why I think I'll go back to what both Nushin and Richa said, which is well-being without keeping in mind intersectionality therefore doesn't work.
right, great. Thanks for sharing it, Madhurita. Indeed, wellness as a standalone intervention is not going to work. Everything has to come together. Very true. Nushin, I would come back to you, once again, that there's one practice that's tied with intersectionality and well-being is the creation of safe spaces. So, given how wellness is one of your main priorities as an APAC leader, how have you enabled the creation of safe spaces at a global and local level?
Okay. Um, creating safe spaces. Okay, why is it important? It's important so that employees can feel seen, they can be heard, understood, and everyone in the organization feels valued and respected. Now, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of initiative, and at TCS we've done a lot over the years, and I'm quite happy to share, quite excited to share some of the things that we've done. Okay. The first one is getting leaders to start as the acting point, okay, in the whole awareness journey. Some time ago, we had Girish, who is the head of the APAC region. He led a panel discussion on bringing your whole self to work, okay. Whole self, as you know, we have two personas. We have one at work and one personal persona. Those are parts that we feel uncomfortable bringing to work because we want to show ourselves as being successful and capable, right, at work. So the concept of bringing your whole self at work, um, that is requires the organization to have the safe space, have a conducive environment where people don't feel judged. Yeah, people feel free to express themselves. So in this discussion that Girish had, he spoke about his journey with TCS and how throughout his career he felt comfortable who he was. He got the support he needed from the organization. He had backing of his bosses, and basically getting a leader to talk openly about his own experiences, his or her own experiences. That's a starting point towards any awareness initiative, and for anyone to actually accept that the organization is actually backing such kind of an ideology. Okay, so that's the first one, getting leaders to act as a starting point.
Right.
To create safe spaces, again, we have lots and lots of initiatives. So there is one very common one across all organizations are these employee resource groups, right?
Yeah.
Different groups with like-minded individuals that share certain diversity points. They come together based on their interests, and these are usually voluntary or employee-led groups, right? Um, um, so we have various channels, like we have an internal social networking site, or you have a chat channels or groups on Teams as well, where people can come together, share their experiences, stories, concerns. They can put a microblog or a blog, post a question, and others will respond to it. So there are lots of such groups. Some of them are like colors, QOLORS, the LGBT community and their allies. There is Now, which is network of outstanding women. This brings together women, through formal and informal interactions, to understand each other emotionally, personally, support each other, professional friends. So lots of these kind of employee resource groups. Okay. The third way to do it is enabling guided as well as spontaneous discussions around all of these topics. Okay, some of the things that we have is like we have something called a diversity library. It's like a human library where the employee presents themselves as a book and they share their own life stories. So we had one of them, an example is where we had an employee talk about their own journey of coming out. Okay, we have something called be inspired sessions to inspire others. These are conversations about inclusion across ages as well. We have wide age group. Now we have a young workforce, we have people who are older in the workforce. Across countries this differs, the age differs as well. We have sessions where a manager talks about what someone on the autism spectrum brings to the IT sector. Yeah. So these kind of sessions, she says, a courageous story of a trans woman at work. Okay, how the challenges that trans woman has dealt with at the workplace. These are the sessions that are to inspire employees. And what we do is that we have these sessions across countries, across continents. They're common across one session for people all across the world, and they're recorded as well, so people can refer to them at a later time. It stays as an asset. Another one is an EAP program, your employee assistance program, where you have counseling facilities available. Okay, you have professional counselors. They provide a very free, open, non-judgmental space for people to come and discuss what their issues are, find solutions, understand their own selves better. Okay, so that's quite important. So this is something we provide for employees as well as their family members. It's completely confidential. We don't get to know what was discussed unless there is, some incident that may cause, or situation that may cause harm to the employee or others. Yeah, so that's an EAP program. Lots of other initiatives like mentorship, counseling, a dedicated Pride Month across something called Pronouns Matter, lots of other initiatives on being inclusive. But
Right.
the most important effort that we have put in is towards eliminating the feeling of separation or feeling of being the only one. And that you can achieve by creating a community feeling where people feel comfortable. Okay.
Yeah.
All of these that I've just spoken about, I've tried to be very quick, but they're just a small fragment of what we do. Okay. But
Right.
what we're actually trying to achieve is that make sure it's people feel that these topics are topics you can talk about.
Yeah.
We show employees by recognizing what their unique challenges are, and together we are working together to get your best, everyone to get their best selves out at work. So those are some of the things we're doing under the DNI umbrella. I'd like to also take a minute to talk about some of the well-being initiatives that we have across TCS, if I may. I'd like to
Sure.
um, also share something. Let me just try. Yeah. So, can see my screen?
Yeah.
Great, great. So,
You can just
just
make it full screen so it will be better, legible.
mm,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, as long as you can see the circle, that should be enough.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So, the entire holistic well-being sessions that we have across TCS, these are designed to support all individuals across different segments, across intersections, making sure we have something for everyone, to help everyone with their own unique needs. To start with, I'll talk about the fitness, the Fit for Life initiative, which encourages all employees to pledge certain kilometers and hours to their fitness and log their efforts against this. Okay, you all must have heard TCS also sponsors a lot of marathons, encourages people to walk, to run. So that's all under Fit for Life. Yoga, Madhu also mentioned, yoga is quite common. We have an in-house yoga council. They are all certified yoga instructors, and this is an employee-led council that leads yoga across the globe, not just in India but across the globe. Under physical health, we have our health checkups, preventive wellness talks, lifestyle-related issues, ailments, those kind of things. A doctor visiting office, all of that comes under physical health. Mental health is quite important. We have something called TCS Cares. It's TCS's initiative to providing mental and emotional support to all employees, under which there's an EAP, which I spoke about. There are lots of videos, articles, self-help resources, seminars and workshops, manager sensitization sessions, letting managers and employees know how you can recognize signs of a troubled employee. Okay, that's an important one for them to also realize this person needs support. How do we support them? What avenues are available for them?
Right.
World Suicide Prevention Day, Mental Awareness Month in October, all of these are also all part of our AAP. Under social well-being, there is Maitri, which is based on the philosophy of together, caring, and sharing. And that's basically about all these events that bring employees, families, fun events, bring them together, creating that feeling of belongingness so that they give their best self to work. Yeah. We have Purpose for Life as also. That's a platform for employee volunteering efforts under CSR, and that takes care of employees giving them enabling employees to contribute to societal well-being. Financial well-being, we have loans, we have advice or tax planning, saving, investments, all of that, looking after employees, making them take control of their own finances, know what they can do, how they can help themselves. Then there is, of course, safety in the workplace. There is nutrition. We have a corporate nutritionist who talks about, eating better, eating right, shopping better. How do you shop for food? Those kind of things. Okay. When TCS turned 50, we had a recipe book as well under nutrition, which was a collection of recipes from across the globe, from TCSers across the globe. And finally, ergonomics. We have people spending a lot of time at their desk, on their computer, even at home. So it's vital for them to look after their ergonomics, their eyes, uh, you know, all sorts of advice, all sorts of assessments on how you're doing on an ergonomic basis. So that's a whole big wide range of well-being initiatives that we have across TCS.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for sharing that, Machine. I really like the idea of leaders pushing this, the number of ERGs that you have, and diversity library initiative. I think that's something very pretty unique. Thanks for sharing all of those with us. Padmavita, I would like to come to you next, because You're a diversity champion, and making inclusion, diversity, and equity a way of life has been one of the central aims of diversity dialogues. But you know very well this is easier said than done. So, how have you been able to carry out these, small scale processes to deliver large organizational impact?
We've been trying, Shweta. I have to acknowledge and say that, diversity and inclusion as an area, diversity, equity, and inclusion as an area is a journey of progressive realization, which means that you keep realizing as you move on the journey. It's not an ultimate thing that one is designing for, is aspiring for, but it's a learning every day. Having said that, in about the 100 organizations and plus that we worked with, and I want to qualify an organization or a workspace as any space that has people in it. It's basically that we're also diversity dialogues is also an organization. So looking at it from that lens, the few things that we've sort of seen work is when diversity and inclusion is approached holistically. And by that, what I mean is that you look at it from, let me put it into three or four distinct pillars. The first one being around processes, systems, policies, infrastructure. The second one being around the culture within the organization. The third one being around talent and thereby representation. And the fourth one being around also product, also supplier, also the larger ecosystem. And this can be applied, these four pillars, if anybody was to apply it to any organization, it would predominantly work. So when I talk about process, policy, system, for example, if I take the first pillar, the work we've done, the work we've seen happening also in the space has been around how do you make your policies, your processes, your systems flexible to different employee groups who are present.
Yeah.
A simple example of it is, do you have same sex partner benefits, or are you, for example, assuming that everybody in the organization is a married couple and only they are entitled to sort of therefore have insurance for their partner? That's an example of it. Are you assuming that everybody is able bodied and therefore nobody needs any reasonable accommodation? There are people who need it. So how are you making a policy around, say, reasonable accommodation, where you also put the onus on what is needed by the person on the person themselves? They may need a hearing aid, or they may need a sign language interpreter, or they may need, and I'm taking only the deaf community as an example, and that decision is theirs and you support them, and how do you make that happen? So that's one example of it. In a conversation that you have in a meeting, do you have captioning enabled? Do you have a sign language interpreter? Are you doing those things? That's your system, process, infrastructure, that part of it. How are you making sure your recruitment process, your job descriptions, all of those things are sort of bias free? And I don't mean bias free, but at least people are aware of what it is and are cognizant of it, and you're sort of taking the element of bias off from the process. So that's one area of work that we do. If I were to look at culture, and I think to the point that Nushin made, from employee resource groups to the leadership to the diversity and inclusion council, who's holding accountability? How accountable is everybody in the organization feeling towards becoming more inclusive,
Right.
towards keeping this in mind, towards being aware of their own biases and working towards it, right? So that becomes like the second element of work that we do. And on that, we write from work, organizing dialogues to workshops to those kind of interventions, to a lot of capability building work that we do with leaders and with employees and with also employee resource group members and so on and so forth. We do a range of dialogues around that. The third part of it, which is the talent piece, which is around talent recruitment, talent development, also engaging with diverse groups of talent. For example, we run something called safe spaces, also called coaching conversations in certain spaces, where you have people, say, from certain groups like the LGBTQ plus population or persons with disability who are in organizations, reach out to us through a helpline and say that this is the kind of difficulty that I'm facing. How do I sort of overcome this at
Yeah.
home, at the workplace, and so on. So in addition to the employee assistance program, we also do this kind of work. So that becomes the work around the talent piece of it. The last piece is, of course, something that I wish more organizations do. I have to acknowledge that it isn't as much, is to look at the product diversity piece. How is your app, for example, any app that you have launched, is it accessible to a person with visual impairment? And are you missing out therefore a very large part of, there are large number of, it runs into some millions, and I don't remember the exact number, but there is a large number of people in India who are people with visual impairment. So if they're not able to access your app, they're not able to also avail your service, right? So that kind of work we help organizations with. Also, the suppliers you are engaging with, how diverse is that group? Looking at it beyond employees, that becomes sort of something that's important, and we look at that as well. The two things that I think I want to particularly also touch upon very briefly is, one, we've done some work with multiple organizations on domestic violence and what can workplaces do. Because in each of these pillars I have spoken about, organizations can very much assist. For example, having a policy which says that if you're going through domestic violence and if you tell us and you need a certain leave or you need to be shifted to a certain other place, an organization can provide that kind of support. So we are helping organizations build that. We have a guide we've launched last year, which is domestic violence and the workplaces, and you can find that on any of the diversity dialogues channels or even on our social media pages. So that is something that we're particularly sort of very excited to see that there is progress there. And the other piece that we've done is to author, in partnership with Mariwala Health Initiative. For them, we'd authored a guide which talks about counseling in specific and mental health in specific for the deaf community. So we're trying small steps to make it more accessible there, because if you can see, it is largely talk therapy, and I don't know how many sign language interpreters are counselors and how many counselors know sign language. I think the numbers are very, very few. In the country itself, there are only about 300 sign language interpreters. So given that, it's a very minuscule number. The deaf
Yeah.
community does have mental health challenges like any able-bodied community. So how is one catering to that? So that's something that we're taking baby steps towards. So this is sort of the work that we've done in this space. Like I said, there is a long way to go, and we hope to keep doing something in this space.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing them. Madhukar. Those are very, they are small steps, but they do make a large difference to a large number of people, and every step counts. I think. Thank you so much for sharing, those steps with us and our audience. Richa, I would want to come to you next. Because you're an organization that kind of offers well-being of the workforce. You ensure that. So, what are some of the key challenges that you have witnessed in implementing your counseling programs?
Very interesting question. Um, I think we live in a country where mental health is considered a taboo. So, as much as we are all struggling, and I'm sure the pandemic has all given us, it's this proof that while we're dealing with COVID-19, we're also dealing with a mental health pandemic, which is so global in nature. um, in spite of that, if you are a person struggling with anxiety, depression, you had issues to deal with, you won't go into therapy until you have reached that situation of emergency, until you've started getting panic attacks that are affecting your work, until you find it so difficult to get up in the morning because you've been having a depressive episode, right? So coming back to a very very huge challenge with Atties, as a mental health platform, is that we know we need support. We know that we need to kind of go to a therapist and talk about what we're going through, but taking that first step is so difficult. And so many times I ask this question to people, whether it's a training or like a panel or a workshop, how many of you have actually gone to therapy yourself, right? And so many times there are just two or three hands that are actually going up. So if I am in a leadership workshop, when the leaders themselves have never been to therapy, what kind of what is it that we're setting as an organization, right? So I feel like when we're talking about mental health and we're trying to talk about creating these amazing counseling programs, I feel like you need to look at two different kinds of approaches, from a top down, from a bottom up. I think if as an employee I need to kind of go to therapy, I also need to know that my manager is okay with the concept of mental health, because I am going to constantly fear that, oh no, I'm going to lose my job, and they're not going to understand that today has been a very, very rough day for me. So I feel like just the fact of there's just so much stigma, and it's layered stigma, right? So it's easy to say it's stigma, but there's just so many layers of stigma. So I loved this one statement that Madhumita made around companies coming up with yoga related programs, for example. But during COVID-19, there is statistics to say the amount of domestic violence or domestic abuse that increased in the country towards women. And when your video is off, you have no idea what's happening in this employee's house. You don't know if this space is a safe space for them or not, right? So COVID
Yeah.
19 has come with its own level of challenges. People have to work from home. We're assuming that they can work from home. They have
Right.
all the possible resources to be able to do this. They come from a environment where they can absolutely pay attention to work as well as pay attention to their home, and look at a work life balance that we all, I think it's a fantasy that we all want to achieve at some point, right? So I
Yeah.
think keeping stigma in mind, keeping COVID-19 in mind, I think it's also important to understand when we're talking from a from a queer spectrum. Since I identify as a queer person myself, most people in a large organization or any organization, again, we are trying to talk about being inclusive at workspaces, and come out and like talk about yourself. It's okay, you can absolutely do this. But the amount of discrimination that is happening in smaller groups, like, do you know that if this person goes to the canteen, that they're probably facing some amount of discrimination, bullying? Do you have any idea that if this person comes out and talks about their gender identity or sexuality, there is some amount of stigma that this person is facing? We're
Yeah.
telling people that, you need to come out of the closet, you need to be able, why aren't you just, being open about your identity? But what are we really doing to be able to make this a safer space for them, right? So not just in terms of work, but I say this in educational institutions, but in a canteen over there, or like in a staff room, or in a team, are you sure that every team member is actually affirmative?
Yeah.
Now coming to employee assistance programs, and I feel that's where ATIs actually came into being. My personal observation is that most of these employee assistance programs, the EAP programs that we talk about, they offer counseling, they offer therapy, but are they offering queer affirmative counseling practices? Are they
Right.
offering trauma informed practices, right? So as a therapist who passed out of who did a master's in clinical psychology, was I trained in working with a person with disability? No. Was I trained in working with queer individuals? No. Was I trained in looking at things from a trauma informed lens? Because people come with so much of trauma which has nothing to do with maybe it's not from a biological perspective or a genetic thing, but the fact that they've lived in very unsafe environments, right? So
Yeah.
as a platform, when we say that we're an inclusive mental health platform, we mean that we're queer affirmative in our approach. Very, very few EAP providers who are actually queer affirmative. So I think when we're looking at a mental health program, we also need to make sure that, are you addressing or are you reaching out to every employee in your company? So these are so many different challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, ever since these conversations have started to increase. And this is how, again, another important thing that I think one of you mentioned was, we need to look at everything from a very holistic point of view, right? Because if we don't, then we're always going to miss out on somebody, and these are such important sensitive issues. It's going to take time, right? It's not going to be like today, we are LGBTQ certified, and from tomorrow people are going to come out of the closet and very comfortably going to talk about these conversations. Very
Right.
recently, people have started putting their pronouns, let's say, in their emailers. many people still don't understand the importance of pronouns in, like, for example, whenever I'm a part of a conversation, or when we're trying to talk, why are we talking about the importance of pronouns? In fact, with Atties as a platform, with any customer, any employee who comes in, we ask them their pronouns. Most people don't know. They're like, oh, what pronouns, why pronouns? And it's okay, because then it's our responsibility as a platform to be able to talk about the importance of why we're doing this, right? So there are so many challenges while we're trying to work in this very, very amazing space, but we know that our programs are then going to it's going to improve, let's say, the overall job satisfaction. So it's not just for employees but for employers as well. It's not just to create happier workspaces but to create healthier workspaces. I think one of you mentioned about work burnout. And if you're going to reach a point of burnout so soon, your productivity levels are absolutely going to drop down. So yes, I mean, there are a lot of challenges, and not like these challenges are going to go in the next 1 year as well. But as a platform, and with the other work that Madhu and Nushin are doing as well, I think collaboratively we can reach a point to be able to address this.
Great, thanks. Thanks for sharing that, Richa. Indeed, collaboration and holistic approaches, what Madhumata pointed out, is yeah, what we need to kind of address these challenges. Since we are speaking on challenges, Nushin, I would want to circle back with you also. That what are some of the challenges you faced in implementing wellness initiatives? How did you overcome them? And how did you align them with your DNI initiatives? If you could share with us.
Sure, sure. So, Shweta, if you don't mind, it's been a very long journey for TCS, and we've already been a long way. So, I'd instead like to talk about the challenges that we think we are going to face now, that are continuing to be present, and we think we're going to face as this whole work structure, the whole pandemic changes again, because I think that's a little more relevant for to talk about. Um, for us, the key is to continue to build resilience for all our employees, okay? Because as they come out of the pandemic, out of the crisis, they need to cope again with changes that the future work is going to bring them, okay? Things are going to change all over again in some time. And also a very important point for us to consider is that employees have spent a lot of time at home and with their family over the last 1.5 year. For them to come back to work, they are not just looking for the paycheck anymore. That sense of purpose, sense of belongingness is all the more important to them, and it's something more that we need to work on as an organization. Okay, we did, Madhu, Richa both spoke a lot about mental health, and it will be the single biggest concern. Wellness in general was always the center stage, but this last 1.5 year in the pandemic, at least, has brought in a lot of stress and anxiety, and this whole no separation from work and home life, right? That's increased a lot of strain on relationships. Lots of people, like Madhu mentioned, is the lady, the women bear the brunt of the home and school work, so there's a lot more in childcare responsibilities, home responsibilities have got added up over the last year and a half. A lot of health anxiety also for people who've been through COVID. A lot of financial worries also may be there. So over the last 1.5 years, what I feel we've achieved is there is a lot more acceptance towards mental health issues. People have understood that we're normalizing it. They've understood that everybody faces mental health issues. It's not just physical health. Mental health also needs to look like how you go to a doctor. You need to go to see someone, a specialist who can help with any issues that you're facing. Okay, so
Yeah,
we've been able to change the mindset a little bit, I'd like to say, across the organization. But now it's up to companies not just to give that EAP program that we have, right? And Richa pointed out some very key points we need to. I need to go back and look at my EAP program now and see whether we are, all those factors are covered that Richa mentioned as well. But employers need to recognize that it's not just about giving EAP, but it's about having a culture, the company culture, that shows that one cares about their employees and their people. It's not just about having that counseling facility available.
right.
So that's under mental health. There's a lot of focus now coming up in IT companies to getting people back to the office, right? From November, December, you've seen some videos of employers are getting ready, trying to convince employees to come back. Now, we have to also consider that the workplace has changed. People coming to work every day is not going to be the case any longer. People are going to demand that flexible working, okay? And from the organization perspective, we need to make sure we are meeting our clients' needs. Our employees, our colleagues are connected, you know. Getting people back to work, employees also, they need to make adjustments. That whole commute that you have saved, Madhu, I'm sure living in Bangalore, you might have had a long commute of couple of hours, or people in Bombay and the local trains, right? They have to again get back to that, again make daycare arrangements for their children, right? All of those changes also is what employees need to make. Now, over the last 1.5 years, lots of changes the organization has made in response to this whole situation. Okay, they have been really quick. They might have happened over the next couple of years. I would have moved flexible working organically, slowly. It would have happened, but they have kind of boomed and moved really fast in this last 1.5 years. How do we keep that going? Are we going to evolve? Are we going to go back to where we were? Okay, all of these new ways of working, lots of work around that is needed on how we can continue, how we can evolve. All of these virtual and in-person events. Again, Richa said that that yoga session, you don't know whether it's a safe space happening otherwise in their house. But even though these virtual events have allowed us to have events across the globe, right? We have one common, we find like two common time zones across the globe, and you can run one large event, get lots of people to take part in it, or lots of
Yeah,
people to view it, enjoy it, whatever. But what is the effectiveness also, we don't know. Is that person, multitasking? Because lots of multitasking has increased. People are using joining meetings from the laptop and their phone at the same time. So what are they actually doing? Are they really doing that yoga, or are they concentrating? Are they really breathing, or are they just looking at emails, responding to texts? What are they doing? We don't know. What is the impact of all of these virtual events, effectiveness of these events? Um, in terms of engaging employees, doing all these events is also an overload that is coming out. Okay, there are so
true.
many more avenues. Are we killing these by giving too much to employees, too many options? How are we bringing structure into everything that we are offering to them?
Yeah,
um, and finally, I think office benefits that we have, right? Team lunches, cards, these travel cards, fitness classes, those kind of things. Those benefits, they're not as important anymore. So how do we rethink those benefits? So these are some of the challenges we need to look at. Daily data, behavioral insights on how employees are doing once we change again. Like in TCS, we have this timesheet app. Everyone needs to fill in a timesheet, record what they've done, how many hours they've worked for the day. It's a simple change that it asks how you're feeling today, gives you that data on a daily basis. You can take a look at how many people are feeling how on that particular day. So those are
right.
some of the things we need to consider while we're looking at the future, the challenges that we can look at.
Great.
Um,
Thanks. Thanks for sharing that, Nasheen. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something. Yeah.
I was going to talk about aligning them with DNI.
Yes,
Again,
please.
the key is programs need to be flexible, they need to be broad, and they need to be tailored to meet individual needs. And if you're going to have a diverse set of people who plan these programs, that's when you can ensure that they're going to be easily accessed by all types of employees. And when you're doing a wellness initiative that accommodates a physical activity that accommodates different employees, you're not only promoting inclusion and diversity, but you're also doing well-being. So you're also enhancing the interaction between diverse employees. You're also enhancing employee engagement. So yeah, that's it.
Great. Great. Thanks for that last point, Nasheen, that yeah, people who make these, initiatives also need to come from a diverse background to ensure that diversity is, sorry, well-being kind of percolates to every section. Thank you. Madhumit, I would want to know your take on implementing well-being programs. How do we drive them, with intersectionality and inclusion with workplaces? And you can give examples from organizations in which you have worked. How do we kind of use intersectionality to drive well-being programs?
Right. I think one which Richa mentioned, which is absolutely sort of relevant, is to actually check, the employee assistance program that you're associated with. one, I would actually go ahead and say check their representation of mental health, of where they come from, the counselors that are associated with them. But also check for then queer affirmativeness, and check for, how affirmative they are from a caste perspective, how knowledgeable they are from these different perspectives. And that's an important check, I think, that organizations absolutely need to do. The second piece that I would actually say, that if you do not have that kind of an employee assistance program available, then to actually launch and have separate programs, have even listening circles, safe spaces, whether you do it within an employee resource group or not, doesn't matter, but opening that up, spaces where people can express grief, where people from different communities can come in, talk about things. I think that becomes like the second thing that is important. The third thing that I would go on to say is more a structural intervention to mental health, to well being, not just mental health, but overall well being, is to ask, how is work happening in your organization? I think somewhere we are sort of associating interventions with well being, but also to say, are people working 18 hours a day? And then if you're making them work 18 hours a day, and if they're working weekends also, then how is their mental health affected by just what's happening in the workplace, even if they're not going through any bullying or anything because of their identity? Even otherwise, how is it affecting? And can you streamline that? And can you look at, therefore, workforce planning? Bring in more resources. If one person is doing three people's job, then you need to relook at that, because mental health is also affected by everything. Right, so I think that becomes like the third important thing that I would sort of pull put and say that that is important from an intersectionality angle, but more from an overall well-being standpoint as well. The fourth, which I would say is, and this is something I'm going to associate with the challenge, is often people, because mental health, there is a certain stigma, the utilization, even if you're opening up counseling and things like that, is often not very high. Right, but my question would be to say that, is it necessary to measure everything with a utilization percentage? You may have in the earlier times when there were physical offices, you would have a doctor in the house, right? And doesn't mean everybody is going to go to the doctor all the time, right? So people may not want to avail counseling, and that should also be a choice that should be available. The fifth is, and this many companies that we've been working with do, specifically in the manufacturing space, is to open up your employee resource assistance program to not just employees, but also to family members.
Right.
Right, because the important thing to note is that, say you have somebody in a factory in a certain space in the country, for that individual, mental health and affordability on that front may not be there, and that is awareness of socio-economic class and how that plays a role. So when you
Right.
open it up to family members, what you're doing, I mean, of course, the education and breaking the stigma and all that needs to happen in parallel, but you're also providing that support not just to the individual, but also to the extended system, the extended family. And the family could be defined by the individual in the way that they'd like to define it, and that is also making it intersectional. So all of those would be like four examples that I would give of things that one could do, and some organizations, of course, have ended up doing.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Bhagavata, and especially bringing that angle about opening in the access to family members as well. It's not about the individual alone. His well-being depends on, his family as well. Great. Thanks for sharing that. Richa, coming back to you, like intersectionality is a critical value of well-being design. What do you think? How can leaders incorporate this value in their well-being programs?
Okay. All right. Um, I think four values that at ease as a platform really keeps in mind and uses that as its lens to kind of move forward. So, when we started this discussion, why was it important to talk about intersectionality and then get into it? Because intersectionality is not a want but a need, and I think that's so important that every leader, manager, senior management really needs to kind of remember and keep in mind that when you are coming from a different gender identity, caste, religion, economic parity, you come with a lot more challenges as well. So when you have that kind of an employee in front of you, and you're only checking on their levels of productivity and how many hours they've clocked in or clocked out, you don't know the other things that also come along with it. So right, so I think when we're talking about intersectionality, it's not a want but a need, and I think every person needs to kind of keep that in mind. The second value, when when we say that we use a very social justice oriented approach, what we're trying to say and what every leader also needs to keep in mind is that people come from different different facets of life, and um, everybody does not have that level of privilege that most of us might have, right? I think some of us here have the privilege to talk about certain important issues, but so for example, when I identify as a queer person, I am probably talking or I'm echoing a lot of queer related issues and problems. Or when Madhumita is talking about her experiences as a person with disability, she's talking because either one of us come from a space of privilege to be able to do this. But again, we need to keep in mind that not everybody has that level of privilege. So as a leader, are we keeping in mind the amount of social injustice that happens in the country and how all of that actually enters your workspace as well? Third value, which again we use from a queer affirmative point of view, I feel like every leader needs to be queer affirmative, right? And it does not change overnight, it does not change over just one workshop or training that you do with your leaders. But we need to understand and recognize that each identity is valid, each identity is unique. We need to affirm that. So what does queer affirmative even mean? It means that if I am a queer person in your organization, you cannot be like, okay, fine, yeah, like how does that make a difference? No, because I come with my own set of challenges, and if a queer person in the organization is coming out, it takes a lot for them to do that. So are we affirming their identity? Are we validating their identity? There are so many things, like I mean, we do so many workshops around this in terms of what is it that leaders can do, and how can they take their how can they use these values in a meeting, in a Zoom call, in a training, when they're giving a talk. You can do this in so many different ways. And the last value, which I say is so important, which is not something that happens very often, is being informed with the amount of trauma that really happens to a person. And are we using a trauma informed approaches? Because sorry, are we using a trauma informed approach? Because we don't know what it is that people are going through, and are we equipped to kind of handle such challenges at our workspaces when we're talking about it? And this is something that my EAP manager recently spoke about, that if we're talking about a hybrid model, we also need to have hybrid solutions. So what are we doing about it, right? So in fact, the other day I had a client who came into a session and told me that my office has asked me to come back immediately, like starting tomorrow, please come back to work. Do we realize that we've been maintaining a certain way of life right now, and you're asking that person to like 360 degrees flip and just start going into work tomorrow? And I feel that is so unfair to the employee, because they have been doing this, it's been so much of adjustment, right? Like, why do
Yeah.
we talk about adjustment? Why do we talk about change? Why are we talking about uncertainty? Because that's the reality of the employee, and you need to ease them into this hybrid solution and not be like, oh no, please, from tomorrow you have to come back into work. So yeah, I mean, there are so many things that leaders need to kind of keep in mind. One last thing that I'd like to add is that in a wellness space, I think for anybody, or for a leader as well, you need to be a champion for what it is that you're trying to talk about, right? So whether you're talking about intersectionality, or you're talking about diversity, or you're talking about being inclusive, you need to be that champion. You need to be that loud voice in the center of the entire office and being like, listen, I'm going to therapy myself. Or like, if you're a queer person, it's absolutely okay to be queer. So I think that if as a leader I start doing that, my team will be like, wow, I mean, it takes a lot to do that, and this person's actually doing it. And if they can do it, so can I. So,
True.
here are some things I think as a corporate, as an organization, we can kind of keep in mind. And yes, one more last thing is, I think I remember one of you mentioned, is that if we're talking about mental health and we're talking about supporting someone when they're having a breakdown, A very simple question to ask anybody is, do you actually know what to do when someone's having a panic attack? When someone's having a panic attack at work, do you know how to support them?
Right.
Or do you just leave it on them, like, okay, they'll go running into the washroom and they'll figure it out for themselves, because there's really nobody around to even know what's happening. So as a company, if we're talking about, being supportive towards neurodiverse people, or if you're being supportive about people coming with mental illnesses working in the company, as a team, we also, I mean, that's what it is, right? To create a safe space, to create an inclusive space. So there's a lot of work to do, and it's a lot of challenging work as well. But I feel until we don't do this, we won't ever reach a point where there's going to be a balance.
Thanks for sharing that, Richa, and especially the point on leaders, that leaders need to be champions. That kind of segues me, into my last question. You've already said leaders, need to be champions. Nushin, what is your one piece of advice for leaders to kind of drive employability? And quickly, because I think we're almost out of time.
One piece of advice is to foster a happier, more cooperative spirit among employees, and that would also take care of some of the things that Richa also mentioned just now. Foster happiness in your team, around with people around you, and you can change the culture. You can change the outlook of employees around you. And for people who are actually running the well-being and the DNI initiatives, employee feedback is very important to take into consideration. So if at the end of these programs that you're doing, run a short survey, you'll understand whether people are interested, not interested, they thought it was okay, not okay.
Yeah,
Get input and feedback from employees for programs that you are going to run, so that you can get, you help improve the future programs that you're doing. So be, and finally, be considerate about everyone. Understand the over nature of all the challenges people are facing, and be considerate, thoughtful, and design your programs in a practical manner, and you will do well.
great. Thanks for sharing. Be considerate and take feedback. Madhumita, what is going to be your advice to leaders?
So I would say listen, because I don't think we listen enough as leaders. So I would say listen and affirm, believe what they are telling you. Every employee, whatever they're sharing, believe it. The second
Right.
thing that I would say is start with how you're feeling. Each of us can also talk about, as a leader, if you want others to open up to you, you also open up on how you're having a good day, a bad day, what's happening with you. Because when you open up, you're role modeling, and you're going to give other people permission to also express themselves, to share. And that, therefore, that becomes like a very, very important thing to do. So those would be like the two things I would say. And the last one would be to take care of yourself, because I think you're also a human being. So as a leader, when we expect that, oh, I have to be there all the time for other people, how are you doing things to be there for yourself? Because otherwise, leadership would become very challenging as well. And I've heard people say that leaders end up shouting, and sort of there is a burnout there also. So how are you taking care of yourself? Don't listen beyond how much you actually can. There are trained professionals to do that. So you may want to divert there. So all these three things, I think, become very important.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Madhumita. Listen, affirm, but take care of yourself also. That's a good advice for leaders. So I think we're almost out of time. In fact, we're a little over time. So I think we'll conclude the session here. Once again, thank you, Richa, Madhumita, and Rusheen, for your great insights. I think we had a fabulous session today, and once again, I want to thank our partner at Ease, who made this possible, and all of you for the invaluable information, the inputs that you have shared with us and our audience today. Thank you very much for your time, and stay tuned for more such discussions. Thank you, and have a great day.